What is up, everybody? Welcome back here to Deborah Out. We are in the top 5. We're talking top 25 countdown here, and we are going out to Notre Dame. We're going to talk about the Fighting Irish, what they have coming this year in the recruits. We're going to talk impact players. We're talking transfers, their schedule, what we like there, and some injuries. We have some recent injuries that happened that are going to play a big role in that team. But before we get into that, let's talk about last year's team 2023 recap. Marcus Freeman's got his team kind of rolling. When you're looking at it overall, they were 10-3 last year, finished top 15 in the AP poll at 14th. Up and down year. They were okay points per game, 39.2 when you're looking at that. And they were a pretty good defensive squad as well. They only allowed 15.9 points per game. They were 7th in the nation last year. So you like that. But schedule, weird. They started off there. That Ohio State game, man. 10 guys on the field. They should have beat Ohio State, and that would have probably changed the way that kind of their season went. Losing to Louisville was definitely not one of those games, but I feel like if they beat Ohio State, that would have been probably a different game there. And then losing to Clemson. I think right there, they had a shot to get in the playoff, in my opinion. If they beat that Ohio State game, I think that changes the directory, but they didn't. That was a big part of that there. They had Sam Hartman at quarterback, 2,600 yards, 24 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Audric Estime obviously was one of their workhorses, 1,300 yards and 18 touchdowns. We'll talk about the losses there. But underperforming year, I think, when you're looking at it, I think they expect a little bit more. But with the roster that they had, it's not a bad showing, but I definitely think they could have contended for that playoff spot, which at Notre Dame, if you're not in a conference, you got to contend for the playoffs. That's your conference championship is making it there. Now, when you look at this year, what we have coming back here for Notre Dame, and you're looking at it just from an offensive perspective, right? Just seeing how they did last year. Points per, yards per game, they were 29th last year, so pretty good there, but really leaned on the rushing attack. And we'll talk about kind of what that running back room looks like this time. When you see that yards per rush, they average over 5, partly due to their offensive line. You're running behind Joe Alt. Not a bad person to run behind on that offensive line there. From a passing perspective, they were okay, but middle of the pack, and they didn't really pass that much. Passing play percentage about 99th, those type of things there on that side. So what do we take away from this 2024 team on the offensive side here, Christian?
I think the big thing is their offensive line. It does return 3 critical pieces on the interior, and I think that that's going to play a big role in how this offensive line can move the ball. But the tackles are brand new. Emil Wagner didn't play many snaps last year. Tosh Baker now is being forced to start, and he was really, really rough when he was out there last year. And so you kind of have a bigger problem. Obviously, you were always going to be worse losing Joe Alt and Blake Fisher as your 2 tackles. But this is a significant step down. And I think when you talk about their new quarterback, Riley Leonard, I think that he has the ability to, make plays and get outside the pocket and work outside of structure. But also I think that he succeeds with a strong offensive line in front of him because he can hold the ball and take sacks and be a little bit careless with the ball as well. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy here where I think Riley Leonard's going to have to take a massive step forward to make up for what I think will be an up and down offensive line. I think they're going to have good performances. They do have good pass catchers. Jaden Greathouse was one of those bright spots last year. It's been a while since we've seen a Notre Dame, freshman wide receiver that made a name quite like Jaden Greathouse did. But, his season went up and down as well. So Mitchell Evans is coming back off of injuries, one of the top tight ends in the nation. Bo Collins is there now, and I think that that's going to be a critical piece. But this running back room is certainly going to look a little bit different. Jeremiah Love and Audric Estime are very, very different players. I have always been a fan of Jeremiah Love. I think that he can lead this backfield, but they're going to go heavy committee. They did last year. I think Love is going to get, the starters reps, but Jadarian Price, Kedron Young, I think they're going to get a lot of work as well. I like Kedron Young. We'll talk about him when we get to the recruits, but overall, this team should be, I want to say that they're a net push on offense, if only because I do believe in the system. I do think that they upgraded the pass catchers, but it all comes down to Riley Leonard because Sam Hartman was an experienced quarterback. Leonard is too, but he didn't quite have the success in his previous stop at Duke that Hartman did. So we'll see. They have some work to do on this side.
I think from the tight end perspective, Evans and Raridan and Flanagan, those guys are very solid. They're, Notre Dame tight ends. We know that they produce that out there. But the biggest question mark is that offensive line, and Charles Jaguar going down. They talked about Charles being. He was raw too, 6'7", 330 for sophomore coming in, and like they were like, "Hey, we're a little worried about kind of like how good he is and the reps." And he get injured, right? Torn pectoral, he's out for there. And Tosh Baker is a graduate senior, so he's up there. He's got experience, but not game experience. So I think it's interesting with Baker, like what that looks like. I'm worried about Riley Leonard behind an offensive line. I think that's the key. That's really where it comes down to when you're looking at these guys. And the reason why we're talking about the losses, when you're looking at the notable losses, Joe Alt and Blake Fisher. I mean, those two guys, Joe Alt looks like he's a perennial All-Pro top in the next 10 years. Like, that's just the type of guy he is out there for Harbaugh with the Chargers. Blake Fisher, estimate too, though. He was a solid piece. He was a very solid running back. He was very solid for them last year. They leaned on him heavy there. And that's the other thing. They were able to, with that offensive line, the question is there, like, will these running backs be able to do that? And as you pointed out, like, they do have a lot of value there at the running back position. But what are they going to replace them with when that running back area there? And then you're looking at it, Chris Tyree, Zeke Corral, those type of guys. Like, I wouldn't necessarily count them as huge notable losses because they did address that wide receiver room, but that offensive line, that's really the loss there.
Yeah, I don't have much to say here other than, the two tackles and Estime is
Yeah.
is as massive. We've had some longer lists when we've gone through these, uh, but I think just those three are just as impactful as
Yeah.
10 guys leaving. So we'll see how they can overcome that.
Yeah, Jabran Payne, we didn't mention him. He's injured for the year too, because they were really kind of expecting stuff from that running back room. So loss of
Mhm.
Estime really leaves kind of like a hole there. I like
Mhm.
Jadarian Price. I like Jeremiah Levin there. But losing Payne, losing Estime, right? Payne for the season. Estime's gone. Those type of things matter for this thing that needs depth. I think when you're looking at it from a recruiting standpoint, they did pretty good on the recruiting side when you're kind of going through what they had. Overall 10th overall, ninth composite. Transfer rank was 41. We'll get into that. Really, I mean, they really attacked the defensive side. We'll get into that. A guy I love, a linebacker out there from St. John Bosco. I absolutely love. I wrote about him. But CJ Carr, traitor, went from Michigan, possibly to Notre Dame. But I like Carr as a quarterback. I think that he possesses a lot of things. And that quarterback room is deep. They have a lot of depth there. Cam Williams as well, wide receiver 16th coming in from the class out there, 6'2", 188. Lambert, again, opposite tackle. They're going to do well there. He's a top 10 guy in the recruiting class, 6'6", 280, very solid guy. Keydron Young is a guy that you and me like. I like Keydron Young. I think a little bit more than others do out there. And the receiving's not so much there, but from a running standpoint, out there from Texas, he performed well. And I think I have him higher in my rankings than some. Micah Gilbert, Aeneas Williams, another one, a 4-star kid, 5'10", 195, but did a very good job filling gaps and needs, obviously, on this side. Defensive side is where you really see that overall 10th ranking, but a fair class here.
Yeah, I know you like Carr. I'm not a huge fan, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like I think he was a little bit overrated in recruiting services, and so maybe that's where I'm coming from that. But every chance to develop, I still like that quarterback room in general. I like Kenny Minchie. If Kenny Minchie has to play this year for any reason, I think that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But like you mentioned, Keydron Young to me is the big get here, especially when you're talking about now Jabran Payne's out, Audric Estime's gone. Can we lean on this true freshman? I mean, he's got the ready-made body for it. When you
Mm-hmm.
see the guys coming out over 215, he might be able to handle some carries. And I think they haven't shied away from giving freshmen touches. I think
No.
that's a new thing in Notre Dame, but like it's been refreshing. So this is a good class. I like the defensive side a lot more though.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at him overall, when you look at Young and their stats there, I mean, his junior year, he ran for 1,719 touchdowns, and he was the Texas District 7 5A unanimous first team selection as a junior. That's really hard to do in Texas 5A when you're talking about the football out there. So he had that. In his senior year, he unofficially broke the record for their high school. It's hard. Max Press is hard when you're talking about stats and all of that there, but he was a solid runner. I think he can step in and be right there. Transfers, again, like I talked about, there were 41st. It really, Riley Leonard's going to push that up a little bit. The guy that like I struggle with because I like Bo Collins. I've always liked Bo because he's out here in California. He just hasn't put it together. I think he struggled at Clemson a lot, just being consistent, hands, all of those things. If they can turn it around, I think this works. Chris Mitchell, I think, is another interesting one from FIU. He was getting talked about a little buzzier last year, heading into last year, and everything there. Kind of fell off a little bit, but not an amazing class, but it'll do. Riley could be the lynchpole. If Bo hits the ceiling, then yeah, you're talking about something pretty fun.
Yeah, I think they had to go get a quarterback. Well, I just talked about how I like Minchie. It's just, I
Yeah.
mean, this is a team that is ready to compete pretty quickly. I think Riley Leonard gives them a much better shot to do that. And I think it's a pretty good fit. I think he can run this offense fairly well. I'm a huge fan of his. I think he's got every shot to vault up into first round conversations, but he has to take some massive steps forward, especially with his decision making and things like that. But if he does, like, I would call this transfer class a huge win because the alternative was just not looking great for Notre Dame.
No, and it wasn't. And when you're looking at this, so when we're talking about the impact players, I think we've mentioned enough with Riley Leonard being there. The thing with him, and as I was diving into this, so I was reading an article today from On3, like their insider there, Tyler Horka, and he said, hey, he's the clear alpha in that room. He's their guy. And he said, hey, the wide receivers feel like they're in a better spot. They feel like Leonard gets them to the places they need to go. They really have been raving about his ability to place the ball where they need it to be placed. If those are the things that he hit, that is great, right? When we're talking about Riley Leonard being there, I think the question is, will that offensive line could put offensive line on here? Like, will they be that guy to get him there? And I think his rushing ability, though, I think that'll come into play. Him to be able to extend plays and those type of things. So for me, I mean, this is going to be end all be all by the quarterback. We're college football, for God's sake. We know that. So Riley Leonard's really going to have to take that step and be those guys. And I like Greathouse. He was up and down last year. He came out hot and everything, but I think Jaden Greathouse in there in the slot could be a fun player for them in this offense.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think about like the Debbie community and how they talk about, Eugene Wilson at Florida, and like
Mm-hmm.
Greathouse for the first few weeks looked just as good.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of upside there. Riley Leonard could be an upgrade from Sam Hartman. I don't think Hartman was very good for them
No.
last year. The PFF passing grades suggest otherwise, but like I think Notre Dame certainly expected a little bit more from him. I think Leonard can give them that. And if that's the case, then maybe the ceiling of this team is a bit higher than what their ceiling was last year.
100%. I think he is an upgrade over Hartman. I don't understand the
Mhm.
Hartman thing. Maybe because he had nice hair. I don't know because I
Well,
every
he
time I
was
watch
in college for 7 years too,
he
so
he
everyone
he
just
was
recognized the name.
he
It
was
was rough.
there. And I never watched a Notre Dame game where you're like, oh man, Hartman can beat us. You know what I mean? Like Riley Leonard to me is the guy that's like, oh wow, Riley Leonard's going to come out there. Look what he did at Duke. Look what he did against Clemson. Those type of teams. You're like, oh, he could beat these guys. And that to me really stands out. From a defensive side, when you're looking at what they do last year, they were a very good unit. They were top 10 in points allowed per game, opponent yards per game. They were top 10. Opponent points per play, top 10. Everything was really top 10 there. From a rushing standpoint, opponent rushes per game and yards per game, they're about 27th, 28th, respectively. When you look at pass defense, they did pretty well in pass defense. When you're looking at that sack percentage, they were top 25 unit there. They got pressure there. Opponent yards per pass, they were number 3. They did not give up a ton of big plays, and that's what kept them in games. They did not give up a ton of big plays. They didn't necessarily have the explosive plays on offense, but they were definitely a bend, don't break kind of a defense, and that's what you have to like about this team.
Yeah, and I actually think they're a bit better now.
Mm-hmm.
Howard Cross anchoring down that nose tackle position, one of the best players at his position. We talked about the Michigan guys a few episodes ago or a few shows ago. Howard Cross is right up there, I think, in those conversations. Jack Kaiser to anchor down your linebacking room. I think you're feeling really, really good about him as a player. Xavier Watts returning. He played the most snaps of anyone on this team last year and was really solid, up and down, but like more solid than not. And then you've got Benjamin Morrison, who is also one of the top players at his position. I think a few of our patrons that are into NFL draft stuff have him as their corner one over some of
Mm-hmm.
those guys that we've talked about, Will Johnson, Travis Hunter. Jaden Mickey had an iffy year, but I feel pretty good about his upside this year as well. I guess my question is like Riley Mills was really good for them last year. how are they going to continue getting to the quarterback? Because I think this secondary can lock everything up. I
Yes.
think that they've got a ton of talent on this team, but I do want to see just another step forward in how they're getting to the quarterback, generating those sacks, making that, rewarding that secondary for being so locked down. I think we're going to see it this year. And that's why, like, we talked about the offense giving the team more upside. I think this defense also gives the team more upside this year.
No, I agree. This secondary is a lot of fun. Like this
Hmm.
secondary going through it, like you're talking lockdown. Like this secondary's got that there, and you have to really like what they kind of bring to the table there because they bring a lot of experience back in that secondary room. Like when you're looking at it, some of the pieces out there in terms of losses. Maris linebacker Cam Hart was drafted as well. JD Bertrand, he led the team in tackles, so he definitely had 76 tackles last year, 2.5 sacks. But they it was okay. Like these guys, even Maris, he had 3 sacks out there. Cam Hart was okay when you're looking at what he was able to do. 4 pass deflections, but didn't get any takeaways, didn't have any interceptions there. So guys like that. Then they lost some guys to the transfer portal, but overall, this defense on the back end is very, very good. I think where you say the front end, defensive front and everything, I think that's something to note. But that secondary, it's solid.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I say where can they find, you know, production and getting to the quarterback, it's because their four top sack leaders are on this list right here. Per Pro Football Focus, at least. I know their
Yeah.
sack numbers are a little bit iffy, but like Javante Jean-Baptiste, Leafau, JD Bertrand, and Asafa Mensah were their top four, depending on where you look. And so how can they generate more pressure? I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the big question from this group specifically. But like you said, I liked Cam Hart a ton. I think he's a fantastic player. I'm excited to see what he can do at the NFL level. But I don't think that they're in bad shape in any form with Benjamin Morrison still out there. So I think this is okay.
Yeah, I think they're pretty good back there in terms of that. Cam Hart was fine, but they didn't lose an impact guy, I don't think, from that side.
Mhm.
Recruiting wise, they did a very, very good job. Bryce Young was the number 6 defensive lineman out there. I love the name Bryce Young. Give me a little flashbacks there. 6'5", 244. Now I'm gonna mess this up, but Kingston Vilome Asa, I think is how you say it there. The linebacker. I just did a piece on our Substack writing about 10 freshmen that could really play a big role for, out there for teams. Kingston was on there. And I know that Notre Dame doesn't play freshmen, especially freshman linebackers. Really, a lot of freshman linebackers don't get a ton of run. But this dude's name just keeps getting popped up out there. Like when you hear all this stuff, as I was diving in the article, and it's free on our Substack, you can go check it out. All I kept hearing was Kingston. Like, oh my gosh, this kid is phenomenal. It's Spring, Kingston. Hey, he can kind of do it all. He's going to be that do it all piece here. Like, they love this kid. Now, they're pretty deep at the linebacker position, but they think that he can pretty much play all those positions there. Kingston, to me, really stands out. He's the number 4 rated linebacker at his position, but some think he should have been number 1. They crushed it there. Johnson, the safety, Logan Thomas, Leonard Moore, those type of guys. But really, the big pieces were those first 3, but especially Young and Kingston.
Yeah, I think Bryce Young will rotate in. I think we had him like at third on the depth
Yeah.
chart, on one of the sides there. But I think he's going to be a part of that rotation. And like you said, this Kingston kid. Also, before I move off of Bryce Young, I wish the other Bryce Young was also 6'5", 244. That'd be great. That would really help a lot of things. But no, I mean I've been reading up on Kingston as well, and like the film's really exciting. But like you mentioned, it's tough to see what like linebackers get on the field, especially as true freshmen. And so it's nice to see that everyone seems to love him. I think that he can be an impact player. It's going to be tough to break into the secondary rotation. So all those corners and safeties, I think they're going to be waiting in the wings a little bit, but that's okay. I think this was a really, really good class. I specifically like Leonard Moore. I like, being 6'2" at corner. Everyone knows if you've watched this channel for a little while, I like the long corners that can bully you a little bit. I see that with him. He's a little lanky, a little skinny, that needs to add some weight, but I like the film. So I'm hoping that he can kind of work out for them. But you're right. The top 3 specifically, and really the top 2 are going to be guys that I think can make an impact this year.
Yeah, and for Kingston, here are the 2 quotes that I pulled out for the article. I'll read those real quick. But also at St. John Bosco, 253 tackles, 110 solo, 22 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, 2 interceptions, both returned for touchdowns. And then he also had 5 catches for 44 yards and 5 touchdowns on the offensive side. Kid can play when you're looking at that and you like that. But the big thing from him is that his linebacker coach said, he's able to process information. Max Bula over there, physically, he's there. He came in ready to go physically. And then Marcus Freeman said, once in a while, you see a freshman say, oh, he's going to have a chance to play early. After the first day of spring ball, I said, man, I could see that. And he's already done it. He had the spring, and now he's coming there. That's high praise from a coaching staff, especially doesn't necessarily play freshmen. He's a guy to watch out there that can make that impact. As far as transfers, again, they did not really go out on the transfer side and get guys. Rod Hurd from Northwestern's coming over. He came over as a 4-star transfer recruit, 91 overall. Jordan Clark as well, when you're looking at him. RJ Oben, who could have a chance from Duke. He came over 6'4", 260, kind of get in there. What are you thinking about this kind of transfer class on the defensive side?
I hope that RJ Oben can be a factor. He's
Yeah.
listed as a starter. I think the film's pretty good. He came in as a 3-star recruit, 4-star transfer. Feeling good about his upside. I think they're gonna need him to be, though. I think they need to get some sack production from him. Outside of that, some corner depth. I think that speaks to just losing a couple of corners, but outside of that, not a whole lot of impact transfers. That hasn't been the Notre Dame way, and I don't think it is now.
They can't. It's hard to get transfers in Notre Dame. Just same as Michigan. We talked about Michigan. It's just
Yeah.
hard to get transfers in. I mean, from an academic standpoint, we know it, and it's just one of those things. NIL. What I've heard from NIL, just the back channels and stuff, not a ton of NIL in Notre Dame. I mean, they have some, but again, it's going to be hard to kind of get those guys in there. From impact players, though, I know that you like Howard Cross. Riley Mills is out there. Xavier Watts, Benjamin Morrison. To me, like when you're looking at it, Watts and Morrison, they could be the best safety cornerback kind of tandem in the country. Like they could be the two best out there. And you have to really like what they bring to the table. And they're gonna get turnovers. If they can get turnovers, this team's gonna be a lot better than people think, and maybe win some games there. And I think it starts in that secondary.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, another player that probably could have made this list is Jack Kaiser, the linebacker, where, he's a special player in coverage specifically, but like a very well-rounded player that I think can, help out guys like Watts, help out guys like Morrison in zone coverage and kind of taking some of that stuff off of them. So I'm excited to see how this defense shapes, but really Howard Cross being a game wrecker in the middle would be ideal for them.
Yeah.
Make that run defense difficult. If you can make that difficult, your secondary is good enough. Even if you don't find the sack production, I think this the defense, the coverage is going to be just good enough. So I think this is a team that you could find, one of those freshmen on this list by the end of it, but overall, just a star-studded cast on defense right now.
Yeah. And that's really when you look at the schedule, they're over under 10.5, which is pretty high. I mean, I know they're a top 5 team, but just when we're going over this and stuff, usually 9.5 is the number that people feel comfortable with. But I think that defense is why it's there. Big game early. Texas A&M. I mean, that's going to be, early. Hey, what does that look like? Northern Illinois, Purdue, Miami of Ohio, Louisville, Stanford, a lot of games at home. Like just a lot of games at home and a good schedule there versus Florida State, versus Army, Virginia, at USC to finish the year off, and a USC team that could be reeling at that point, depending on how they look in the Big Ten. What do you think of the schedule? What do you think of that 10.5 number?
I think that A&M game is incredibly fun with Riley Leonard playing Mike Elko. I do think that presents a larger challenge for Notre Dame, though, because Mike Elko knows Riley Leonard, knows the strengths, weaknesses, and things like that. I think that game's going to be really tough. I think Louisville's a tough game for them in the middle of the season there. Florida State, obviously. But I really think they run the table. Maybe USC, but I play the quarterback game, as we do with these, and Riley Leonard's the best quarterback between those two teams. So to me, this looks like it's tough because I think they could drop the game against Louisville, depending on how Louisville's playing right there at the beginning of the season. I'm gonna go under. I think they win 10 games. I think they get in the playoff, but I'm gonna go just barely under here.
Okay. Now, before I get the Notre Dame fans just yelling at me in the comments, I know these games are neutral sites. Georgia Tech, they play Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That is a neutral site, just versus on the schedule. Navy, they play at MetLife Stadium, so that's in New Jersey, so I get that. And in the Army West Point game, is Yankee Stadium. They play Bronx, Yankee Stadium, and that. So there are some neutral games there, but let's get it twisted. Like, that's not good. You should win those games. So, like, if you lose those games, that's on you. Those are going to be some home games, too. You guys know Notre Dame fans travel. I'm going under. I'm gonna go under. However, I think that if they beat Texas A&M, you get a little nervous. I think that Texas A&M could definitely win that game. But if they win, yeah, I think it. But to your point, Elko being there is gonna that plays a little bit of a role. And if that offensive line struggles early against Texas A&M, their defensive front is pretty good. So when you're thinking of like that game, that's a huge matchup. Offensive line versus their defensive line and how that plays out. I'm going to go under as well. I think that it's tough because you're looking at it really. I could see 2 losses, right? I could see 10-2 pretty easily on this schedule, and that makes me nervous when we're talking about it overall. And really, what it comes down to, I think Notre Dame needs to win probably 11 games to get in the playoff, right? Like you're thinking of it like, and maybe 10 gets them in, maybe not. But I think with how it's set up in the playoff and everything there, that's Marcus Freeman's job. Get him the playoff. The way, Notre Dame was on there in terms of how to build out this playoff system. They knew they weren't going to get a first round bye ever. So they really want to kind of be in that 5, 6, 7 range. How do you do that? You win those games and you finish with 11 wins. I still think they can get in because they don't play a conference championship game. So there's an opportunity for them to kind of sneak in there at the bottom half, 10-11 range. But I don't know if they don't get in. I think Freeman's safe because I think he's recruiting really well. But I mean, that's a do-it-all win next year. Like they're gonna have to make it the playoff next year. I think the seat starts getting hotter out there.
I think so. It's tough to tell if a 10-win Notre Dame team gets in because while you mentioned the not playing a conference championship is a strength, I also think that's a weakness.
Yeah.
Especially when the schedule isn't tough. When it looks like that, it's tough to make an argument that this team should get in over maybe even a 2 or 3 loss SEC team that's 3 losses or 2 top 5 teams. And so Notre Dame doesn't have that advantage. I do think there's potential to get in with 10 wins. And really, like, I think maybe they drop the A&M game. I think they could win that Florida State game.
Yeah.
And end up with 11 wins either way. But, they could drop the game to Stanford for all we know. That tends to happen more often than not in college football. So I think this team is talented. I think Marcus Freeman shouldn't be on the hot seat just yet. I think, coming out of this year, we'll see how it looks. That I don't think they can keep hitting the portal for quarterbacks, though. So they need to develop Minchie and Carr and kind of work that way because it's just you're getting lucky in the portal. I don't think you can rely on that forever. So overall, though, good team. I think a rightful playoff team if they make it. I don't know if they can stack up with the big dogs. I don't really agree with the top 5 ranking with the Athletic here.
Yeah, and I do think your point about that quarterback production, they got to. I mean, they're doing a very good job of recruiting and keeping guys there, right? And have that depth and doing there. But at a certain point, recruits are gonna be like, "Hey, you're recruiting these guys, and you're not giving an opportunity to start." I think that's part of that in there, and I think that's something to that's a really big point. I think that's a good point to say, "Hey, you got to give these guys some run." Those recruits need to come, and you're not going to get these quarterback recruits, wide receivers, those type of guys. Like, give them some run, get them some targets. I mean, that's why I think Greathouse needs to have a good year because I could definitely see him transferring out if he feels like he's not getting that opportunity. So, Notre Dame fans, what do you think? Where do you feel like your team is at? I know you guys are a little unhinged, but we love you. How many games do you think you can win over under? Why is Christian an idiot? Why am I an idiot? It's always fun to go through those comments as well. So appreciate you guys. We will check you guys in the next video.